The movie doesn't take a stance on what they're doing. The movie doesn't take a stance on the mission. The movie doesn't take a stance on the war, Iraq war in general. It just shows you what was.
The theme of war is hell isn't new, but in this movie, I think it's presented in such a thought-provoking way that it feels fresh, allowing the humanity of these soldiers to shine through even during unwavering brutality.
Whether you feel like they shouldn't have been there, whatever your political stance, I think one thing that we can all agree on is that there are so many men and women who gave their lives or completely came back different, whether it be from a physical wound, a mental wound, whatever the case may be, who sacrificed their lives and put themselves on the line.
Hey Connor, we've got, that's my favorite, that's the one I can remember.
Charles Melton.
Love him.
Will Poulter, yeah.
He's like dad.
Yeah. Have you seen their nicknames
Yeah,
for each
he's
other?
daddy.
They all call him daddy.
Yeah.
If you've served, like, bless your heart. I'm so, like, thank you for what you did. Thank you for serving. First off, I can't imagine how this film's going to make you feel.
Alex Garland's new film, Warfare, is imperialist propaganda. I know a lot of people have clocked this right away from the trailers, how the movie was marketed, the casting, but still, a lot of people have fallen for the way this movie wants to present itself. But there's a difference between how the movie wants to be perceived and what it actually is. I've even read reviews from people saying they disagree with the American invasion and occupation of Iraq, but still like the movie, thought it was anti-war, and felt like it had something worth saying. But I disagree with this perspective, and I felt very strongly about it, so I wanted to share some thoughts. I figured I'd go over the story very briefly here, just to give some context to the film for those who haven't or don't want to see it. This movie takes place in Iraq during the Battle of Ramadi in 2006, and the entire film, including the dialogue, is said to be based on the real memories of the actual soldiers who this happened to. In the beginning of the movie, the soldiers walk down an empty street at night, choose a random house to occupy, break in, and hold the two families that were living there hostage. As the day comes, they realize that some people in the neighborhood have found out that they're in the house and are planning an attack. As they try to evacuate, an IED goes off and injures two of the soldiers, forcing them to retreat back into the house. The two injured ones scream and cry for the remaining 40 minutes of the movie while everyone around them tries to figure out what to do, until eventually another group of soldiers reaches the house and they all escape. The movie is quite short, and the majority of it focuses on trying to make you feel the way the soldiers feel, but I'm not interested at all in talking about this film's artistic merit. I see review after review talking about how scary the movie is as an experience, how good the sound design or the acting is. But at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind, what is all of this in service of? To talk about this, we need to also mention who made this movie. Now, the co-director of the movie is Alex Garland, who also directed Civil War, which came out last year. Now, thankfully, that there is some distance from this movie, people have stopped glazing it so much, and more people realize that this movie is basically about nothing. I also made my own video about how much I hated this movie, but I would highly recommend watching this one instead. The other co-director of the movie is Ray Mendoza, an Iraq war veteran whose memories made up the majority of the script. Ray Mendoza has worked previously on projects such as Lone Survivor, Jurassic World, Mile 22, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, and Civil War, helping to make them more realistic to the real military experience. Now, just like with Civil War, these two made the press tour circuit, going around talking about how this movie is apolitical. In an interview, Mendoza said, "If you watch that and you're like, fuck yeah, war is awesome, then there's probably something wrong with you. This is what war looks like. I'm not saying don't go to war." In another interview, Garland said, "While it's the most obvious statement about life on this planet that the world would be better without war, it doesn't mean it should never happen." Garland and Mendoza represent a side of American politics that tries to mask the same end goals with more humanist reasoning. It may be obvious that the world would be better without war, but we were attacked. What were we supposed to do, not invade? You may get blown up and you may not be able to walk anymore, but I'm not saying don't go to war. I just want you to know what it'll be like. In another interview, Mendoza is asked about how he feels about other war films. He responds, "I feel not seen. It's actually embarrassing to watch them. They don't get our culture right and we don't speak that way. People have asked, are you worried that warfare may trigger veterans and active duty military? I think it does the opposite. It's saying you're not forgotten, you are seen. And I honestly think that's about all the thinking that went behind this movie. Ray Mendoza wanted to feel represented on screen, and Alex Garland thought it was a good idea. When Garland and Mendoza talk about their movie being apolitical, what they really mean is that they went into making it without any conscious perspective. But the problem with this is that when you try to make a movie about a real event, while intentionally ignoring all of the political context about it, your subconsciousness takes over. And whether Mendoza or Garland want to admit it or not, they do have a perspective that they're putting forth in the movie. When people claim that this movie is anti-war, they point to the fact that this movie lingers on suffering. But I think just showing suffering on screen really cheapens what it means to be anti-war. There is suffering depicted in Lone Survivor, in Saving Private Ryan, in American Sniper. And yet I doubt most people would refer to any of the above as a movie that is anti-war. Now, Mendoza and Garland would probably come in at this point and say, but our movie is real. They talk like real soldiers do, the gunshots are more terrifying, and when someone gets hurt, it isn't just a quick death. But the problem with these movies is not that they're not realistic or violent enough. The problem with these movies are the stories they tell and the stories they don't. Everyone knows that war is violent. The marketing of this movie makes it clear everything in the film is based on memory, recreated by the people who lived through it, the most realistic war movie. Do you think people coming into this movie are not just a little bit curious about that violence, just so they can edge a little bit closer to the real thing? In this movie, we are presented with a group of American soldiers who just suffer, but without anything to say, anyone watching the movie fills in the context themselves. Now, Mendoza and Garland would probably be screaming, but that's the point of the movie. Everything is based on memory. Any perspective is something that you project onto it. But that's exactly the problem. When I watched American Sniper for the first time, I absolutely hated it. It is about as unabashed pro-war, pro-American propaganda as there is. But many Americans watched that movie and loved it. Americans who went into this movie either supporting the war or knowing nothing about the war saw the movie and the PTSD that Chris Kyle deals with throughout the movie and thought to themselves, man, that guy sure went through a lot. War definitely isn't easy. In fact, Chris Kyle is kind of brave for going through all of that suffering, isn't he? Can you honestly say that Americans who support its wars or completely ignore them saw this movie and didn't come out thinking something similar? Warfare doesn't have to be explicit about its support for the war in Iraq. It doesn't have to mention it at all. It is a blank slate where supporters of war can watch it and reflect on how much their military servicemen have sacrificed and gone through for them, and where imperialists who invade other countries and help kill and kidnap civilians like Ray Mendoza and Elliot Miller can watch and feel represented. Anyone who claims to be anti-war, as Garland does, would not make a movie that lets people like that feel represented. They would not make a movie that would allow anyone to leave the cinema and think, this is what war looks like, including all the blood and tears. But that's just what some people are willing to put themselves through. And of course, it would be better if there wasn't war, but sometimes you just have to invade. What a big sacrifice these men have put themselves through. Now, some people would still say, that's all fine and good, but this is just a movie based on Mendoza's memories, and you can't critique reality. So I'm going to talk about another war movie that is also completely based on real experiences written by the person it actually happened to. The 1959 German movie, The Bridge. The Bridge follows 7 young boys who are conscripted to the Wehrmacht towards the end of the Second World War. One of the local leaders uses his position of power to assign them to protect an unimportant bridge, expecting that they will be safe and never actually have to fight. The 7 boys, all enthusiastic about doing their duty to their fatherland, stand and protect that bridge. Even when a group of retreating and wounded German soldiers tell them to abandon their post and that there is no point in protecting this useless bridge, they refuse to move. Eventually, American tanks and planes do show up, and the 7 boys start shooting at them, refusing to abandon this bridge. 5 of them are killed in the fight, and after another German unit arrives, a sixth is shot after he goes crazy and threatens one of the other soldiers. The film ends with the line, "This event occurred on April 27th, 1945. It was so unimportant that it was never mentioned in any war communique." Both The Bridge and Warfare are based on true stories and are written by the people these events actually happened to. The difference between these two films is that it doesn't matter whether an anti-fascist or a fucking Nazi watches The Bridge. There is no interpretation of this movie that allows anyone with any political beliefs to come out of this movie feeling like what those 7 boys did was good or worth it, or that their suffering was for some greater cause. Coming out of Warfare, the most generous interpretation that I could give is that these two directors think that war is bad because it is violent, and not for the reasons that it is fought. Shortly before all the soldiers leave the house and the family that they had held hostage for the last day is let go, one of the women grabs a soldier and asks him why. The woman asks why, and it's posed as some generic question that just doesn't have an answer. Something for Americans to think about while they use the toilet after the movie and then forget about right after. But the question of why does have an answer, and it had an answer even before the war started. America went to war for the same reason it has always gone to war. It wanted to secure more markets. They wanted Iraq's oil, they wanted to make money. I'm not going to go into the entire history of why the Iraq war was fought in this video. If you want to actually learn about it, I would recommend chapters 6 and 7 of Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine. You can definitely find a PDF version of it online. Or if reading is not your thing, then you can listen to season 1 of the Blowback podcast. This innocent woman whose family was just kidnapped and whose house was destroyed asks why at the end of the movie, as if there's no context or explanation to what just happened. But there is. Every single one of these soldiers made the decision of their own free will to go and invade another country so that their country's bourgeoisie could take over the invaded country's natural resources. It is imperialism in one of its rawest forms. Throughout the entire Iraq War, about 4,000 American soldiers died. In that same time, an estimated 180 to 210,000 civilians were killed, directly because of violence. Innocent people, men, women, children, grandparents, who were shot, or had bombs fall on them, or were crushed by tanks. When you factor in what the US had already done to Iraq in the years leading up to the 2003 invasion, the people who died after having their homes and workplaces blown up, and people who starved to death or died from preventable diseases because of sanctions, that number easily goes into the millions. And nothing about this movie is worse than the ending. At the end of the movie, the soldiers have to evacuate the home that they've been occupying. To do this, 2 tanks have to roll through the neighborhood they're in, and to make sure they don't get shot, shoot into all of the surrounding homes to provide cover. The top of the tank turns all the way around and shoots into every house on the street so the soldiers can make it to the extraction point. I know that Garland and Mendoza don't really care, but I feel it's important to point out that every single one of these homes that was shot into was lived in by actual human beings and not just set dressing built to be destroyed. And I say that I know Garland and Mendoza don't care about this because the very second the tanks roll out of frame, Iraqis with guns come out of every window, door, and hole in the wall to gather in the street, implying, without having to explicitly say, I know you just saw us destroy an entire street full of homes, but look, the enemy was all around us, in every home, behind every wall. Mendoza was not present for what happened after he and his war buddies destroyed this neighborhood. This was an intentional decision. After cutting to black, the screen reads, and I shit you not, a thank you to the US military for always coming when they need help, and then a montage of behind-the-scenes footage of the real soldiers working alongside the actors. The montage ends with the actors and the real-life veterans all posing for a picture while they hold their middle fingers up for the camera. Like they're all just a bunch of silly guys having fun, you see. I'm sure for Mendoza and his buddies, they can look back and reflect on all the things that happened to them, the good and the bad, what they went through, and what I'm sure they felt like they had to do. I'm sure that in the cinema they all watched the movie and felt represented on screen and that the movie was accurate to their experiences and their memories. Do you think the two Iraqi families who were held hostage, or any of the people in the homes that were destroyed those days, could say the same?
I honestly blame American foreign policy for a lot of this stuff. American foreign policy is horrendous, because not only will America come to your country and kill all your people, but what's worse, I think, is that they'll come back 20 years later and make a movie about how killing your people made their soldiers feel sad. Oh, boo-hoo.
Hello everyone. I'd like to thank my Patreons for supporting me and the videos I make. I promise I have another more serious video coming out hopefully in the next few weeks, but this was something I wanted to make real quick because I saw this movie and I really hated it. This is not a real criticism of the movie, but I wanted to bring it up here in the credits anyway. In this entire movie, not a single US soldier dies. The only two people who are killed from the American side are the Iraqi collaborators who helped the American occupation, and of course a lot of Iraqi jihadists, as the movie calls them. But no Americans. If I'm gonna watch an American war movie that takes place in the Iraq War, then one of the few positives of the movie will be that you get to see some American imperialists die. And this movie doesn't even let you have that. So I will never say that you shouldn't watch a movie or read a book, because with enough context and discussion you should be able to do anything. But please don't waste your money on this movie. Neither the studio that put it out or the people that made it deserve your support. Instead, you should watch The Bridge, and read Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine and Lenin's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capital. I promise it'll be better for you.